Well, good evening, everybody. My name is 12 Gage. Welcome to my channel, 12 Gage Investigative. I have a very special guest tonight, Jennifer Coffindaffer. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, and I want to apologize to you as well as your audience members. Just a time difference, but thank you so much for having me.
No problem at all. You know, last night I did a campus death series that I started, and I was talking about Elliot Rodger and I was talking about Danny Rowling because it seems that these type of individuals, their name is in the headlines with the true crime community because they're always being compared to the recent people that are either killing or having the deaths on campus. We have the Lakewood Riley case. We have, cases like that. And these individuals, you have knowledge of these two, correct? You remember Elliot Roger?
Of course, and I always find it so interesting that basically for decades from now, I think we're going to be talking about Brian Koberger. We're always going to be talking about Elliot Rodger and Rollings and Bundy and all these individuals that committed these types of murders because each of them were very unique and brought something to the stage that I think, unfortunately, other individuals who become serial killers may try to copy or use in their mo or in their mindset. So it is, I find it so intriguing how much we can learn from the old violators.
Yes, exactly. You said the operative word right there, copy. And there have been, a lot of similarities in both of these individuals, and of course, the Idaho case. Brian Koberger supposedly was deep into Danny Rowling and understanding. We don't really know about Elliot Rodger, but he was studying other people and their MOs, as you said. So it is very interesting. And it's something that we will continue to probably as people of interest with the true crime community or with serial killers or just killers in general, we will be fascinated with how the mind works, correct?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you look at the FBI's behavioral analysis unit in Quantico, that is what they do. They basically take all these details and everything that they can learn from each of these murders, and they put it all together and they study every bit of it. And it's supposed to help individuals identify when departments, police departments, local departments, state authorities might have a serial killer on their hand. Of course, the Bureau intersects often to help with things like behavioral analysis, of course, the resources they have, the analytical capacity that they have, and expertise in many instances. But at the end of the day, BAU is, I mean, they make up the unit that analyzes and tries to sort of make, I don't want to call it a cookie cutter, but tries to at least make an analysis or a profile that people like to say on individuals who commit these types of murders over and over and over again.
Well, that's interesting that you were saying that because I was having a question over here as you were talking. I wanted to ask you, at what level does the Bureau get involved? Of course, the local police departments and or the state police have to ask for assistance, but are they the chief investigators once they're asked, or do they step back?
Well, first of all, venue determines a lot. In other words, if the FBI does not have any venue in a particular case, they step back and from the standpoint of the other department can be the lead. But just take as an example, since everybody's familiar with it, the Idaho case, Moscow, right? That was a teeny tiny department. And so in that case, they had 60 FBI agents at one time assigned
Right.
to that case. And I remember I made a comment, and the next day, I didn't mean to insult Moscow's police chief, but essentially, when the FBI is responsible for doing all the analytics, if they're responsible, as an example, for crime scene, in that case, they weren't the state, the Idaho State handled that as the chief and primary. But of course, they're going to exert a lot of power and a lot of decision making because they're in charge of the analysis or conducting the interviews, and then they funnel that information back to the locals. Take a
Okay.
capital like Delphi. Delphi, another teeny tiny department, hadn't had a homicide, I think, for 7 years before that happened. And it was one single one, nothing like what they had. So they invited the Bureau in, but very, very late, unfortunately. And then there were issues between the local authority and the Bureau. And so the Bureau stepped away and let the local department run things, and the state department or the Indiana State Police run things. And so it depends. Every case is different,
Yeah.
but usually they invite, and then let's take it one step further. Luigi Mangione, right? Luigi Mangione, that case was a clear cut federal case, and still today you see the New York authorities sort of, in my opinion, posturing against the federal authorities because the federal case is going to go early, September. That's set for trial. And the New York case is set to go after that. And so now you see the New York authorities saying, whoa, 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 we want to have the New York case before the federal case. So sadly, everybody likes to say everybody gets along, and they do for the most part. But I've seen posturing. I didn't see it in the Idaho case. It was ridiculous in the Delphi case, and we're seeing it again in the Luigi Mangione case.
Well, hopefully the gaps get a little closer where there's not as much, um, I guess, for the sake of the case, who's really in charge, who's really, you know what I mean? Like we're doing most of the work, blah blah blah, so to speak. Hopefully the gap closes a little more when they are asked for help, because they do have a lot more ability to have the newer technology to investigate crimes faster and to hopefully find a suspect faster. And with that being said, I want to shift gears a little bit to the case that you and I were discussing off camera, the Anna Kepner case. You're familiar with that, are you?
Yeah, the Anna Kepner case, I think a lot of people in the true crime community, as we fade into, multiple months since she was viciously murdered. And for those of you who don't know the case, because I know there might be some out there that have no idea what we're talking about, Anna
Right.
Kepner was a young girl, 17 years old only. She was from Florida, and she was on a cruise ship with her family. Her family consisting of her or I'm sorry, her mother and her stepfather, and uh, and her two step siblings. I said that backwards again. Sorry. Her step siblings, her stepmother, mother, and her father. So apologies, I got that swip swapped. In any event, they were on this cruise, and during the cruise, she asked to retire to her stateroom. Unimaginable, but they had three staterooms. One the grandparents were in, one her father and stepmother were in, and then the other one, the step brother was actually in there with Anna Kepner and
Correct.
the other brother. And she was found viciously murdered, basically asphyxiated with what they believe was a arm bar or like a chokehold, let's call it. Arm bar hammer is really another type of move, but the same sort of leverage that one can use as a vice on somebody's throat, causing asphyxiation, and then buried under the bed in the stateroom below blankets and life jackets.
That is terrible. That is terrible to think about that a step sibling would have that kind of disdain for this other sibling to be able to, if he indeed did it, to kill them and then kind of hide their body away from everybody else. Kind of like, okay, we'll stuff her under the bed and maybe nobody will notice that she's missing.
Yeah.
I have heard that this step sibling had a crush on her. Is that true?
Well, this is a 16-year-old young man, and there's a lot of reports about inappropriate action that he took toward Anna leading up to this. Reports from Anna's former boyfriend talking about a FaceTime incident where he actually got on top of Anna, meaning the 16-year-old stepbrother, and kind of was, smothering her or on her in some inappropriate way.
So
And
there was history of inappropriate behavior.
yeah, that
Did she ever speak out to her parents or anybody for help? I mean,
yeah, that's what we understand. Now, again, what we know as far as being facts, we know only from court documents that are in the divorce litigation. Because
okay,
right now, as you can imagine, the father of the 16-year-old is fighting the mother who was on the cruise ship for custody, uh,
okay.
of their children. And of course, they're fighting because I think with some pretty good cause. I mean, look at what happened in this situation. Uh, it would seem to me some less than appropriate decisions were made, just even on where everybody was sleeping, especially in light of this history, right? Of the 16-year-old being inappropriate with Anna.
There has been a lot of talk amongst the true crime community because, once this case broke, there was a lot of people taking sides, so to speak, like should Anna have been in there with her two younger siblings? Was that an appropriate place for her to be, especially if she was afraid of this 16-year-old, because she had obviously voiced concern that she was afraid of this individual to her boyfriend, correct?
Yeah, and I believe to others. And the bottom line is the grandparents were also on this cruise, and I never understood why she didn't just stay with the grandparents. That just seems to be so appropriate, a place to stay, and then the two boys could have been in there. So a lot of people have raised that concern, and obviously, based on what we know now, which is that according to these documents, he is the named suspect. And he actually is not in the custody of his mother or his father. A third party actually has him in their custody, which for me as an investigator, I just have so much concern over that. At what point could he possibly attack again? I know everybody says, oh, yeah, this was targeted toward Anna. Well, what happens if he decides to target some rage toward another girl or toward the
Exactly.
people he's staying with? If you're capable of manually murdering somebody by strangling them to death, you are capable of a lot.
So, also, wasn't it reported that he went to the hospital like right after this, once they docked or whatever, that he immediately went into kind of some kind of hospital? Was it a psychiatric hospital or was it like a medical hospital? Do you know?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Essentially, in this situation, apparently he was emotional wreck. And when that happens, we saw it happen with Karen Reed as an example. Karen Reed was ushered away from that hospital and put in for psychological evaluation because they couldn't show that she wouldn't be a harm to herself or others at that moment because she was going crazy. And that's what happened apparently with this young boy, that he needed a psychological evaluation. They needed to make sure that he wouldn't harm himself or others. So yes, it's very true and telling, very telling.
And if he wasn't charged with murder right off the bat, being a juvenile, I don't know what international law is. Maybe you can help me with that. But being a juvenile, I know unless you're charged, most of the time they release you to the custody of the parents. And then they kind of go with that kind of avenue. Could you help me with that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge problem with this case because crimes aboard planes, trains, and boats are the jurisdiction of the FBI. And
Okay.
so they are charged with investigating, which would make it under federal law and jurisdiction. So, as an example, say you bring cocaine aboard a ship. Well, you're going to be charged federally with that, even if it's a quantity, because that's just the law. And so, in this case, this is the issue. The federal government does not have the capacity to care for juveniles. In other words, there's no federal juvenile detention facilities. We don't have the court systems. And so, because of that, one of two things happen. Either he's going to be actually elevated to and be charged as an adult. That's
Right.
very rare. Or they are going to finish this case and um, submit it to the state, to the local authorities, in other words, for them to adjudicate it, for them to try it.
Because had this happened, let's say at your local, whatever city, let's say he would have killed her, they would have charged him. And if they are going to consider him an adult, then they can hold him either in determinate or indeterminate sentencing based on what they want to do, whether they want to hold him as a juvenile until he reaches the age of 19 and then he goes to finish out his, adult sentencing, whatever it might be. Is that correct?
Well, at the local level, typically they could do one of those two things, but because
Yeah,
this is only going to be a federal case, it's either going to be a federal case, and like I
right.
said, they're going to charge him as an adult, or they're going to pass it off, and then that way he can continue through likely the juvenile system. Look, if the FBI determines that this case doesn't rise to the level of being charged as an adult, it's very likely that the local authorities won't go against that. It's usually they fall in line because you can imagine the argument that could be made at the local level. They would introduce to that local judge or jurisdiction, listen, they didn't raise him to an adult level at the federal level. Why are we considering this here? So, and I
Right.
think there's a lot of factors. The biggest factor the Bureau is going to look at, and the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to be the egregiousness. Obviously, this resulted in death. It's extremely powerful and a horrible, destructive case from the standpoint of Anna Kepner and what she suffered. But I think there are mitigating factors, perhaps. Obviously, his age is mitigating. And also, we don't know, but he may have been intoxicated. We don't know for sure. And then also mitigating could be the fact that there are so many details on this that we don't know yet because this happened at sea and then the boat came back in. And I would argue this is why it's taking so long. There's so much for them to go over 12 gauge.
So I have a question for you as well. Since this happened on the cruise ship, obviously that's the crime scene. But if the ship was docked, would the island become a crime scene as well, or would it just merely be in the room where she was found?
Well, if they were on that boat, that would typically be investigated by the Bureau. But I got
Okay.
to tell you, I can't think of a case personally. I was in the U.S. Virgin Islands station there for 4 years. I can't think of a case where the crime occurred docked. That's just in my experience. It typically the crimes occur when they're out to sea or discovered out to sea, and then that's where the Bureau has the jurisdiction.
Okay. Okay. So the floating crime scene, they take custody of the crime scene, they start their investigation, and then what happens? Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Well, it's a huge deal whenever you have
Well, I know, but
you
for the viewers, is there any way you could simplify it?
yeah, oh yeah. No, yeah, that's what I was saying. I mean, you go on the cruise ship, you have to uh first of all take complete control of the crime scene, and the crime scene is huge. Remember, because we don't know what happened after the crime. Was he walking around in the hallways? Did he go to
Right.
another person's room. In other words, his parents' room, his grandparents' room. Did he go down and work out? I mean, we just don't know so many details about what happened. But I can tell you, you said it well, a big floating crime scene. And so just to take over that ship, to cordon off, figure out who witnesses there are, because remember, just the people, as an example, who were having dinner in proximity to when Anna decided to leave, those are potential witnesses. They could be in a cabin completely on another part of the ship. But what did they see in terms of the interactions between them before they left? Or before she left, and then he was followed, and all the people that could have seen him following her before they even reached the stateroom, all the people that might have seen them interact before this crime even happened on the ship. So you're dealing with
Great
all
insight.
these.
Yes.
It's absolutely a nightmare, to be honest with you.
I mean, also the people in the cabin next to them, did they hear anything? Did they notice a scuffle? Did they hear any screaming? Did they hear, did they notice anything in the hallway? Was there, when they canvass it just like they would any other crime scene, correct? With CCTV and things like that?
Well, of course, the canvas would be going stateroom to stateroom, but in this case, most of the time the customers are still allowed to wander around, and they're,
Yeah,
they're in
yeah,
the casino, they're having breakfast. And again, that's what really complicates these types of cases. And then you talked a little bit about the camera footage, the video footage. That can be very extensive to review that, to sit there and look at all the different angles and all the different hallways. And remember, it's going to be from the beginning of the trip, from the minute they hit that cruise ship on. They're going to have to follow all of that to see if there was anything that led up to this. Were there other instances where he made advances and she brushed him off? What all happened? That's why this is taking so long.
do you have any thoughts on this? I'm sorry about the dog yapping in the background.
Oh, I didn't
Yes,
even notice. I guess because I love dogs. I mean, my major thought on this is it's going to be a little bit longer. I can't imagine that they're going to elevate this to an adult level. Like I said, those factors. I think there's probably going to be some evidentiary issues. I think the fact that he's only 16, I think the fact that he's in that family, situation. There's a lot of, there's going to be a lot of head shaking. We've talked about it, that he was allowed to room with her, which just kind of, put a match to the straw, I think, uh,
right.
in terms of allowing opportunity. I just can't imagine that this is not going to go to the local authorities, especially. I know as an FBI agent working gangs for 6 years, we had a lot of cases involving juveniles. I never once, well, I can't say that. I think I think of some of those big cases, the 48 people we arrested once, the Crip guy. There might have been maybe a handful of juveniles that we took adult, but typically never. We passed almost all those cases off to the locals. Having said that, this is a murder. So we're going to have to wait and see. There's going to have to be a convening of a hearing to help decide all of this. So
Of course.
it is.
One thing that I read or I heard earlier while I was researching a little bit on this case was that the mother was telling this her ex-husband, I guess the father of the 16-year-old, that the 16-year-old kept saying he didn't remember anything that happened. So I wonder if they're setting up for the possible mental health issue or along that line. I wonder if that's a setup for that. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, honestly, we could take any case anymore in true crime, and that's what the defense always says. There's a mental issue. I can't think of one case where they don't try to throw that up. I mean, something an egregious like this, a murder, especially a family murder. They always throw that. Like Brian Koberger, they threw that up. I mean, it doesn't matter what the case is. They're going to try to argue, mental incapacitation at some point that led to the issues involved. So I 100% think that, first of all, we talked about this where he was taken to the hospital with an issue. And
Yes.
then on top of that, those text messages where essentially the mother of the 16-year-old is talking to her ex-husband and saying he doesn't remember anything. There's all sorts of messaging going back and forth because she texted him, something like 911 emergency, you got to give me a call. And so we don't really know what happened. I mean, there probably had massive communications beyond these text messages, but
I
certainly
mean,
sets that up.
if this does go to trial, um, I know that the U.S. government has like a 99.8 conviction rate, as I heard last. I do know, but I don't know about the intoxication. It might have be brought down to manslaughter, would it not? If it was intoxicated, if he was intoxicated, the 16-year-old intoxicated, could they possibly, instead of first degree murder, couldn't they possibly drop it down to manslaughter? Can you clear that up for us?
I mean, it's possible. You mean if it goes to the state level? In other words, the local jurisdiction. Yeah, that definitely could be a bargaining piece that they go with. And I think because he was taken directly to a hospital, I think there is going to be lab results. The reason that
Do
no,
the federal level, do they bargain like that, or is it just strictly, this is what we're charging you with, we're not really backing off of that?
the federal
Oh,
level, we do plea bargains all the time.
okay,
It depends on the strength of the case. And because the federal jurisdiction allows for ridiculously strict sentences. So, somebody at the state level may literally get 5 months for a crime that would get them 5 to 10 years at the federal level. Just as an example, felon in possession of a firearm, that's a 5 year hit minimum.
right,
At,
automatic, yeah,
and you're out maybe the next day and then get time served at the local level, depending on the jurisdiction. So there's huge disparity in sentences. So,
of
but
course.
again, he would have to be elevated 12 gauge up to an adult for the for
And
the
that's interesting. That's an interesting chart that you brought up because many people don't realize that if you do get that mandatory 5 years, you could still get street probation that you would have to serve as well. Like you could possibly get that 5 year, go in there and do 4 years and 85%, and then get out and have 10 years probation. So there's two levels of federal mandate that they give you once you're convicted of a crime, where in the state level you generally go in there, do your time, like you said, you get out on parole, you do the rest of your parole, and if it's good, then you're good to go.
yeah, it's very different at the federal level. It's just so much stricter and so much more time, and then you're going to have to do probation afterwards, and it's a whole different ball game. How strict the federal side of things are.
Right. Do you believe that I haven't heard anything? I'm sorry about cutting my questions off like that. I'm a little more polished usually, but I have so much going on in my brain right now. Just, as far as the 16-year-old, have we heard whether he has any kind of issues such as this in school? Has he had any anger issues that, have you heard anything that would collaborate him acting like this other than with Anna? Have we
Right.
heard of any other issues such as anger or harming animals or anything like that?
Right. The corroboration in this case is we don't have it. And this is strictly why he's a juvenile. So there's such a cap on that. In other words, where would that most likely be seen? School records, and all of that, which of course are not going to be given out. HIPAA, possibly, if the parents took him for counseling or there were issues. So, and the fact that he's a juvenile, I mean, the plug is tight on this case, not to mention the fact that the FBI is investigating this case. And In the Bureau, you're not allowed to say anything. Under Cash Patel, things have slightly changed. Only that Cash Patel, can now say some things, which is so unusual for any director ever. I've never really seen it before. Very limited that you'll ever see a director just talking about, the different cases. But we're seeing that now. But basically, there's a lid, a plug in the mouth of every FBI agent's mouth. Can't talk about these cases, and that's why we're not seeing anything.
We had an individual in chat that just Jennifer, she said, yes, according to family members, he has had anger issues or things like that. So that's good to know that, if he has prior history, then obviously that can build a pattern of behavior that could have led up to this situation.
Yeah, and Just Jennifer's great. I'm sure she's over on maybe tuning in on my show. She's great. She really keeps up with these cases and really digs. Will that meet the standard to, because it's hearsay and so on? But boy, if there is direct documentation of issues that have happened, that could definitely be suitable for the court of law.
Right. So, you were mentioning your jurisdiction being the cruise ships and stuff like that. Is there any other cases that you can think of right off the bat that intrigued you that you'd like to share that maybe have some closure or maybe were so confusing that it took a while to get a conviction?
I mean, I have a case that has nothing to do with a murder per se, but I think it's a very interesting case that
Okay,
it took a while to solve. So I'll be happy to share this case. It's just kind of interesting in this
okay,
day and time. Of course, this happened right on the heels of 9/11. So I'm going to have to take everybody back to the climate after the Twin Towers fell, after we had the most horrific terrorism event on soil in terms of the number of people lost at nine
right,
11 So this was at a time when you could get a plane ticket for $50 to travel across the country. This is at a time when the airline industry had to be held up really by the federal government because they were about to implode. Because airline travel, all of that, people were terrified. And so at that time, I was responsible for the Dallas Fort Worth airport. Now, somebody might think, oh, the airport, that's nothing. Well, the airport, DFW, is its own city. So it's 18,000 individuals who are there. And in terms of the number of passengers, I think, back then you could be looking at 400 to 500,000 a day,
easy,
commuting
yes,
through. I'm sorry, 18,000 acres. Sorry, 18,000 acres. The 5 police stations, you guys look this up. It's so interesting. Five. About 300 fire and police officers just at DFW. Again, it's its own city, own post
wow,
office, graveyard, and everything. A lot of people don't realize that. And it's huge. It's about the third busiest airport in the United States. So it's just massive and it's huge. So anyway, you can imagine with that number of commuters, with all the individuals who live and work in and around there, you have a lot of crime.
right,
In particular, right after 9/11, there was somebody that was um, using stamps to stamp on the cockpit windows, on lockers of individuals that worked there, on things in the area we called the AOA, Airport Operations Area. And you had to have a special badge to even get into this area because that's where the planes were. That's where the air traffic controllers were. And you saw all these notes being written, and they said things like, "Down with America," Osama bin Laden lives, and basically completely anti-American,
right,
pro Osama bin Laden, pro terroristic messages that were showing up all over the airport. And I got the case, and I thought, oh my gosh! So I've got a stamp so I don't have any particular handwriting. I can't even necessarily use a particular, like, we look at everything. For instance, if I see it's markers, I might literally go to in and around the airport Ulyss and some of these other cities that were closed and literally see if anybody purchased it, even though I know what you're going to say. Oh, Jen, that's a a needle in a haystack. Well, I can't tell you how many times that kind of work leads you to individuals who commit these crimes. So anyway, started in on this case, and luck, and this was purely luck. There was a canine officer, again, 5 police stations, hundreds of officers and fire rescue there, and a canine unit. And this canine, I just happened to be walking because I was actually assigned at the airport, so my desk was there. I had a big office there. It was really, I loved that assignment. And I was walking by, and I heard her say something about an argument that her husband, who was a baggage handler, an American, had gotten into with another baggage handler. Sorry, I'm
Oh,
going on and on about this, but
you're
and
fine. Fine.
I was like listening, and basically another baggage handler was saying wonderful things about Osama bin Laden and horrible things about the United States. I'm like, "God,
Wow.
sounds like my case." So I talked to her and I said, "Hey, can you get your husband to get this guy's name?" So she did. I get the name. Then I go to my contact over at American. I say, "Hey, can you pull up this? Here's a subpoena. Can you pull it? I need to see his file." I go in there and look at his file, and there was a huge incident where he was one of the main baggage handlers. And when you are one of the main ones and you put what they call the payload, all those baggage and everything on the plane, you have to estimate how much weight that you've put on, how many bags you put on, how much weight, and report that to the captain so that then he can adjust his you know instruments and how he's going to land this plane, how
Right.
fast, how low he's going to descend, when, all of that. My son's a pilot. I'm certainly not, and you can tell that. But basically, all the aerodynamics involved in the weight of a plane landing at particular speeds.
Right.
And he had adjusted what they call the payload to make it extremely, I think it was heavy. It doesn't matter. It was either very heavy or heavy light. I remember it being very heavy, which would have caused, if they would have used those specifications, that would have caused the pilot to crash
Oh
and keep
man.
everybody on board because the payload was so off. Well, right before takeoff, apparently they're going through things, and someone figured out, and I can't remember who it was, whether it was his boss or whether it was the pilot, figured out that for the people that were on the plane and everything, it just didn't seem right. They went and recalculated. It was completely off. They asked, this person's name was Kevin Bob. They asked Kevin Bob, wait a minute, what about this? And he said it was an error. He said, oh, I can't believe I did that. He got off with a slap on the wrist. But
Oh
right
no.
when I saw that, I thought, I am definitely barking up the right tree here. This guy had an AOA badge. We know he was angry with the United States and loved bin Laden, according to this great witness I had, who was another baggage handler who didn't even go to the police, was just basically talking to his wife about it, and she happened to be talking about it to somebody in the bullpen. And also, I went to BAU, the Behavioral Analysis Unit, and I had them look at every single message that was sent. I think there were like 32 of them, 23, 32 something. It was a big amount. And I had them analyze what was being written. They came back to me and they said, you're looking for somebody 40 to 50 years old, prior military, son likely in the military, white male, middle class, blue collar. And I mean, they sent that back to me very early on. I'm like, wow, okay,
So
now,
he met the profile, right? He met the
perfect,
profile.
perfectly met the profile that I had been given
Oh,
before I stumbled upon that conversation. So I put together a search warrant and we go to, I believe he lived in Euless, if I remember right. So we go to Euless and a whole swarm of FBI, and we conduct a search warrant there, coming up empty. And I separately am interviewing him in a room, yeah, at his house. So I'm interviewing him, blah, blah, blah. Finally, after, gosh, probably an hour or more, he finally broke down.
oh
And
no.
he said, "Listen, it's me." He said, "All the all the evidence is in my gutters."
Wow.
Tell
What
you
a place. What a place to store the evidence.
exactly. And after that, I always looked at the gutters. Everybody thought I was crazy. They're like, "Jed, come on, you're not going to make us get up on the roof and do look at the gutters." And I'm like, "We're looking at the gutters because if it
Right,
happened once, somebody else could have those ideas." By the way, that
right.
was the only time we ever found evidence in the gutter, but I made sure it wasn't going to get past us.
So
And
this was a very time-consuming investigation, right? It's not like,
it
yeah,
was very urgent. I mean, I worked day and night on this because we knew that there was somebody that had the capability of blowing up a plane, of shooting
right.
somebody who was right there where the pilots were, where the air traffic controllers were, that had this kind of hate and this kind of rage.
So what
So
kind of sentence did he get, if you can share that?
yeah, no, he got, I believe, I want to say less than 10, but more than 5 years. I can't remember
Wow.
exactly. I'd have to literally go back and look, but somewhere in that range for making terroristic threats. But
Yeah.
anyway, he did express sorrow, regret. He came totally clean within an hour of my interview or so, maybe an hour and a half. Um, and so he got acceptance of responsibility. Um, he was really kind of a, you know, pathetic person. Do I think he could have elevated to? Obviously, he could have because he was willing to crash a plane by a just load. So he was capable of violence. But anyway, yeah, just kind of an interesting case. It has nothing to do with mass murders or a lot of what we
Well,
do.
regardless, it has everything to do with the investigative process, and many people don't seem to understand sometimes. We think we know what goes on into an investigation. We watch CSI, we watch, all these shows, and we believe that, oh, the guy's caught within an hour. And
Oh,
what you just said, it's very time consuming. So, that's real life in the field.
yeah, real life. And when you have a case like that, obviously I was getting a lot of pressure. You can imagine from my bosses and their bosses because we didn't want a horrible incident to happen at DFW right
Oh, of
after.
course, of course not.
And so I put every case, all my other cases to the side, and this was 100% what I worked on, and we got it solved pretty quick, considering. But again, lucky. I always said as an FBI agent, I'd rather be lucky than good, because it's those lucky instances, those instances where I just happened to be walking down that hallway where the canine handlers were and heard that. I mean, how
Yeah.
lucky. If I would have been there 5 minutes before, 5 minutes after, I would have probably never heard that. She probably would have just kept listening to her husband complain about some local being
Right.
mean to, you know. So anyway, it worked out great. But
Yeah, that's one airport that I hate to fly out of. I lived in the DFW area for about 12 years, and I've flown out of, DFW. Love Field is a lot more easy to maneuver around. International, no, not so much. I got lost so many times. So, piggybacking on what you said as far as the acreage and, the how big it is, I totally agree with you. It is huge. It is huge. So
It's 5 airports in one, right? The
yeah,
terminals are A, B, C, D, E, and each of those terminals are 30 to 40 plus gates. It literally, I mean, there's 2 hotels right there, right in Terminal D, 2 Hiltons, I believe, Hyatts or Hiltons. It is huge. It just is, and there's so much crime there. We were so busy when I worked there. It was myself, my partner, who I loved. He and I went through Quantico together, if you can believe it. Then ended up. I mean, still, when I go to the DFW area, I often, we'll have breakfast or whatever. He's wonderful. We were partners for years, 5 years, and then we had another partner that was a bomb tech for obvious reasons, that was a full-time assigned there too. So the three of us were the FBI contingent, and then we worked within the police department. So I love
okay,
working with locals. We worked with all like I said, a 300 plus man department, including, most of them were all cross trained, fire and rescue combined with police. So great folks. One of my favorite assignments.
well, a lot of times you guys don't get the accolade that you deserve for all the long hours, all the dedication, all the experience, the protocols, everything that you have to follow. A lot of times you don't get the accolade that you deserve. Just like everything else. It's almost understood that when you get into the social field like that, well, you're doing it because you love it. Well, a lot of times it's not because you love it. You just don't like people being hurt by these perpetrators.
Yep, you don't. You never never go into law enforcement or the FBI because you want to be rich. If that's
Right.
your goal, to make a lot of money and to live in a huge house, this is not. It's not the job for you. At least during the time you're working. I will say, the kind of work you can do afterwards is amazing. I've been very fortunate and beyond fortunate, in my 3 jobs that I work right now, beyond fortunate. And, you know, all those years of making $30, $40 an hour now are paying off.
Right. Well, I'm going to attend an online FBI training in March. I believe they're doing a training on like assisting individuals with the youth, kind of protecting them from like online predators type thing. Like I just saw a case today that was so sad, Jennifer. I don't know if you saw it, but the 17-year-old that was murdered by the 39-year-old man that she met
I know.
online playing games or whatever, that case is just devastating to me.
Yeah. No, it's terrible. And you look at Roblox right now, which I talked a lot about in the Thomas Medlin case. And as it turns out, it looks like there's no nexus that was made, even though the parents strongly believed there was a nexus and found, I think, 3 additional accounts after Thomas Medlin. That's a missing persons case that it appears that he might have taken his life. Now we know only 15 years old.
Oh
Um,
man.
Certainly, the family still right now, he hasn't been found, at least as of a few hours ago. I'm always checking. I haven't seen that he's been found, and certainly the family still blames Roblox, and I understand why. I mean, there's, I believe, 80 cases I looked up against Roblox for the online issues that occur. But it doesn't seem to be ferreting out from a law enforcement standpoint that Thomas Medlin, that was the reason. But
Mhm.
there's a lot we still don't know. That case is still very up in the air, but I know what case you're talking about. It's horrible.
Yeah, this one was on I think her name is Haley Busby. They found her body.
Mhm.
The individual, I think his last name was Trevor or something like that. He led the police to where her body was, and she's been missing since the beginning of January. That case is going to be something else, entirely to follow. It's going to be an interesting case, just like the Medlin case, like you're talking about. I know very little about that case, but I did look into that. a while back, and it's there's so many cases on a daily basis. You cannot keep up with everything that's going on, such as missing people. The what's her name? Guthrie?
Nancy.
Yes, Nancy Guthrie.
Probably my number one case right now that I'm staying on top of. I find it very unique and rare uh, for an 84-year-old woman. Uh,
Any thoughts? Any
well,
thoughts?
I certainly think they knew very early on from what they've said is the crime scene inside that house. So I'm
Yes,
concerned that there's blood, signs of a struggle. When I hear that, that's what I immediately think of because that's what I would say if I was giving a presser and
yeah,
I knew from the crime scene. So I'm very worried about that case. I'm worried about how that case is going to turn out, to be honest. But keeping the hope, keeping the hope.
exactly. I mean, there's just too many to keep up with, and we have to keep our guard up. Unfortunately, not like yesteryear where we could at least have semi trust with people to do as they said. Now we really can't trust in people a lot. We have to kind of be proactive in our own safety on a daily basis.
Yep, it's so true. You said it well. Well, I can't thank you enough for having me.
Well,
12
I
days.
can't thank you enough for coming and joining me tonight, as well as bringing the audience and everybody. Thank you all so much for your questions and participation. Y'all been wonderful. Y'all been wonderful.
Yeah, they're great. Your audience, of course, I love my audience, and hopefully we'll do this again. 12 gauge. Thank you for having me.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Anything you'd like to say to the chat before I
You know, I've been able to
go?
see the chat. I see it kind of scrolling and everything. Um, but I appreciate that was sweet. Somebody said great show. That's warning La Belle Nina. So listen, thank you all. Thank you. It means so much to have so many people here and
Yes.
engaged in the true crime community that we all care about. And you know,
Yeah. Well, thank you so much and have a wonderful evening and always stay safe and watch your six.
I will. Thank you,
All
Gage.
right. Have a wonderful evening. Bye bye. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining me and Jennifer tonight as we talked about multitudes of different things, but that's what a podcast is about. And we carry a conversation well. I hope that you continue to join either one of our channels anytime that you see us on. And I usually close out my live with my maestro cueing the music. And I will see you guys soon. Thank you so much once again.